The rain came down in relentless sheets, washing the copper tang of blood into the cracked asphalt of Highway 101. She was dying. The blinding halogens of the pursuing SUVs cut through the pitch-black night, but it wasn't the roar of their engines that made her heart stop. It was the low, earth-shattering growl that vibrated through the mud. A massive, midnight black beast stepped out of the tree line, shifting seamlessly into a towering man wearing a bespoke suit now stained with rain and earth. As the armed mercenaries stepped out of their vehicles, weapons raised, he didn't flinch. He simply pulled her broken, bleeding body against his chest, his golden eyes glowing in the dark, and delivered a promise that would ignite a war. "Touch her, and I will burn your kingdom to ashes." The storm over the Olympic Peninsula was a violent one, the kind that grounded flights at SeaTac and kept the locals locked behind heavy oak doors. For Clara Hayes, the torrential downpour was the only thing keeping her alive. The icy rain washed away her footprints in the deep mud, but it could do nothing about the scent of her own blood. Clara stumbled, her torn jeans catching on a jagged root, sending her sprawling onto the forest floor. Pain flared in her side, a sharp, white-hot agony radiating from her fractured ribs. She pressed a trembling, mud-caked hand to her abdomen. The bleeding hadn't stopped. She had been running for 3 hours since she broke out of the holding cell at the Montgomery Timber Private Estate, a heavily guarded compound masquerading as a logging facility. Behind her, the distant sweep of flashlights cut through the dense canopy of Douglas firs. They were hunting her with dogs, or at least that's what she had thought until she heard one of the hounds howl, a sound too deep, too guttural, and too intelligent to belong to any normal animal. Clara dragged herself up, using the rough bark of a pine tree for leverage. She was a senior archivist for the Oakhaven Historical Trust, a completely ordinary woman who had spent her life surrounded by dusty municipal records and century-old land deeds in downtown Seattle. That was until she uncovered the financial anomalies connecting Silas Montgomery's corporate empire to a series of unexplained disappearances in the Pacific Northwest. Silas hadn't just fired her when he found out. He had his security team drag her out of her apartment in the dead of night. A heavy thud echoed to her left. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The flashlights were getting closer. "Spread out. The boss wants her alive, but he didn't say she had to be in one piece," a gruff voice yelled over the pounding rain. It was Jackson, Silas's head of security. Clara forced her legs to move, limping toward the faint hum of highway traffic. If she could just reach Route 101, maybe someone would pass by. Maybe she could flag down a trucker. She broke through the tree line, tumbling down a steep embankment and crashing onto the unforgiving asphalt of the highway. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She laid there for a second, the rain blinding her, the cold seeping into her marrow. Her vision began to blur at the edges. "Get up!" her mind screamed, but her body was shutting down. Tires screeched. 2 matte black Cadillac Escalades swerved onto the shoulder, boxing her in. 4 men stepped out, assault rifles strapped to their chests. Jackson walked toward her, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, rain dripping from the brim of his tactical cap. "End of the line, Ms. Hayes," Jackson sneered, pulling a heavy steel baton from his belt. "You really thought you could walk out of a Montgomery facility? You have no idea what you're dealing with." Clara tried to push herself backward, her hands scraping against the wet gravel. "Leave me alone," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Jackson raised the baton. Then the atmosphere shifted. The air pressure dropped so rapidly it made Clara's ears pop. The ambient sounds of the storm seemed to mute, replaced by a suffocating, heavy tension. A sleek, midnight blue Aston Martin DBS tore around the bend, its engine roaring like a caged predator. It didn't slow down. It slammed horizontally into the lead escalade with a deafening crunch of metal, sending the 2-ton SUV skidding across the wet pavement. The mercenaries shouted, raising their rifles toward the sports car. The driver's side door swung open, and a man stepped out into the deluge. He was devastatingly tall, his broad shoulders filling out a tailored charcoal suit that was entirely out of place in the wilderness. His hair was as dark as the storm above them, plastered to his forehead by the rain. But it was his eyes that made Clara's breath hitch. They weren't human. They were a vivid, luminescent amber, glowing with an ancient predatory fury. Declan Ridgecroft, CEO of Ridgecroft Capital and the Alpha King of the Western Territories, inhaled sharply. The moment his boots had hit the pavement, the scent hit him. It wasn't just the metallic tang of human blood. It was something sweeter, something that bypassed his human consciousness and struck directly at the wolf pacing inside his soul. Mate, the realization hit Declan with the force of a freight train. For over 3 decades, he had ruled with an iron fist, convinced the moon goddess had left him mateless. And now, here she was, bleeding, broken, hunted. A guttural snarl ripped from Declan's throat, a sound that made the mercenaries step back in sheer primal terror. "Fire!" Jackson screamed, his bravado shattering. The men pulled their triggers. But Declan was already moving. He didn't just run, he blurred. He closed the 30-foot gap in a fraction of a second. He caught the barrel of the closest mercenary's rifle, crushing the hardened steel in his bare hand before backhanding the man with enough force to shatter his jaw and send him flying into the tree line. The second man barely had time to turn before Declan's hand clamped around his throat, lifting him 3 feet off the ground. Declan's eyes locked on to Jackson, his amber irises burning holes through the rain. With a sickening crunch, he snapped the man's neck and tossed him aside like a broken doll. Jackson backed up against the remaining escalade, his hands shaking violently as he fumbled for a silver-loaded sidearm. You're stepping into Montgomery territory, Ridgecroft. Silas will kill you." Declan didn't run this time. He walked with the slow, deliberate grace of an apex predator cornering its prey. He stepped over the bodies, stopping right in front of Clara. He crouched down, ignoring the mud staining his suit, and gently, reverently gathered her fragile, shivering body into his arms. The warmth of his skin was intoxicating. Clara felt a strange magnetic pull, a sudden cessation of her panic simply because he was holding her. Declan looked up at Jackson, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that echoed with absolute authority over the storm. "Tell Silas Montgomery he has crossed a line he cannot uncross," Declan said, his fangs subtly lengthening. "Tell him the Alpha King has claimed what is his. Touch her, and I will burn your kingdom to ashes. Now run, before I let my wolf feed." Jackson didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled into the surviving vehicle, throwing it into reverse and speeding away into the night. Declan looked down at Clara. Her eyes were fluttering shut. "Stay with me," he commanded, his voice softening to a desperate whisper. "You're safe now. I've got you." "Who are you?" she managed to whisper before the darkness pulled her under. "Yours," he answered. Clara awoke to the steady, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the smell of sterile cotton mixed with cedarwood. She kept her eyes closed, her mind desperately trying to piece together the fractured memories of the previous night. The rain, the blood, the glowing amber eyes, the impossible strength of the man who had torn through the armed guards like tissue paper. She opened her eyes, wincing at the soft, ambient lighting. She wasn't in a hospital. She was in a massive palatial bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the misty Seattle skyline. The room was a masterclass in modern luxury. Dark mahogany, plush charcoal rugs, and state-of-the-art medical equipment subtly integrated into the space. An IV dripped clear fluid into her arm, and her side was tightly bound, the agonizing pain reduced to a dull, manageable ache. Your ribs were fractured, not broken. 3 lacerations required stitches, and you had severe hypothermia, a calm, clinical voice said. Clara turned her head. A man in a crisp white shirt and a grey vest was reviewing a tablet near the window. He looked up, offering a professional, reassuring smile. "I'm Dr. Harrison. You're at the Ridgecroft estate in Mercer Island. You are completely safe, Miss Hayes." "How do you know my name?" Clara rasped, her throat dry. Dr. Harrison poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe and handed it to her. "Mr. Ridgecroft is very thorough. He had his security team run your biometrics while I operated on you. Silas Montgomery is looking for you." Clara's heart rate spiked, the monitor beside her bed accelerating its tempo. "I need to leave. If Silas finds out I'm here, he'll kill whoever is hiding me. You don't know the kind of power he has." The heavy oak doors to the bedroom swung open before the doctor could reply. The air in the room instantly grew heavy, charged with an electric current that made the hairs on Clara's arms stand up. Declan Ridgecroft walked in. He was out of the mud-stained suit, now wearing dark slacks and a fitted black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faint silvery scars. In the daylight, without the rain and the blood, he was breathtakingly handsome, but his presence was overwhelmingly intense. He moved with a dangerous, quiet grace. "Silas Montgomery does not have jurisdiction here," Declan said, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated in Clara's chest. He looked at Dr. Harrison. "Leave us." "Yes, Alpha," Dr. Harrison said, bowing his head slightly before swiftly exiting the room and closing the door behind him. Clara shrank back against the pillows. "Alpha? What is going on?" she demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. "What are you? Last night I saw what you did. Nobody can move like that. And you, your eyes." Declan walked slowly to the edge of the bed and sat down. Even sitting, he towered over her. He looked at her with an intensity that made her want to both hide and lean into his touch. "You're an archivist," Declan started, ignoring her questions for a moment. "You dig into the past. You found financial irregularities in the Oak Haven Trust records, proving that Montgomery Holdings illegally seized thousands of acres of protected land in the Cascades over the last 50 years. "Yes," Clara said cautiously, "but why would he kill me over a real estate dispute? He's a billionaire. He could just bury me in litigation." Declan sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Because it isn't just real estate, Clara. It's territory, and the people he bought it from, the people he killed for it, weren't entirely human." Clara stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When none came, she shook her head. "I don't understand." "The legends are based on fact," Declan said plainly. "Werewolves, lichens, shifters, Whatever your pop culture wants to call us, we exist. We operate in the shadows, woven into the fabric of human society. Ridgecroft Capital? It's the financial front for the Cascade Summit Pack. Montgomery Holdings? It's a rogue faction run by Silas, who was exiled from my pack 20 years ago for dealing in dark market trades. Clara let out a breathless, incredulous laugh. You're insane. I'm leaving. She ripped the IV from her arm, wincing as a bead of blood welled up. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. Instantly, Declan was there. His hands, massive and searingly hot, gripped her waist gently but immovably, stopping her in her tracks. I cannot let you leave, he said, his voice tight. Not just because Silas wants you dead, but because of why he wants you. Clara looked up at him, their faces inches apart. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. She felt the impossible heat radiating from his body. He wants me because of the files. He wants you because of your blood, Declan corrected, his gaze dropping to her lips before snapping back to her eyes. When my doctor ran your blood work, he found anomalies. You have a dormant lichen gene. You are a descendant of one of the original bloodlines, Clara. Silas wasn't just interrogating you for the files. He was going to bleed you dry to synthesize a serum that boosts a wolf's strength. It's an illegal practice, and you are the missing ingredient. Clara's world tilted. The room spun. The memories of Silas's private doctors drawing vial after vial of her blood in that damp cell came rushing back. The sterile smell of the room suddenly made her nauseous. Declan's grip shifted, one hand sliding to the small of her back to support her as her knees buckled. He pulled her against his chest, just like he had in the rain. You're safe here, he murmured, his face buried in her hair. He inhaled deeply, his chest expanding against hers. I swear on my life, Clara, no one will ever touch you again. Why are you doing this? She whispered against his shirt, feeling the rapid, heavy thud of his heart. Why save me? Declan pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. The raw, unfiltered possessiveness in his expression stripped away the billionaire CEO facade, leaving only the primal king. Because you are my mate, Declan stated, the words carrying the weight of a sacred vow. The other half of my soul. I've waited 34 years for you. You think I'm going to let Silas Montgomery take you from me? 70 miles south, in a soundproof subterranean boardroom beneath the Montgomery Towers in downtown Tacoma, the atmosphere was lethal. Silas Montgomery paced the length of the long obsidian conference table. He was a striking man in his late 40s, with silver hair meticulously slicked back and sharp, aristocratic features that hid the monster lurking beneath. At the end of the table sat Jackson, his arm in a sling and his face heavily bruised, flanked by 2 other pack enforcers. Let me ensure I am comprehending this correctly, Silas said, his voice dangerously soft. You had a human archivist, weighing perhaps 120 pounds, cornered on an open highway, and you let Declan Ridgecroft take her. Boss, he came out of nowhere, Jackson stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. He hit the convoy with his own car. He didn't even care about the damage, and when he shifted... Silas, he's too strong. He snapped Miller's neck with one hand. I am well aware of what the Alpha King is capable of, Silas roared, slamming both hands onto the table. The marble cracked under the impact. His eyes flashed a venomous red, the mark of an alpha who had consumed human blood to enhance his power. Ridgecroft has played the noble king for too long, pretending he can integrate our kind into their polite human society. And now he has the girl. Sir, an executive in a bespoke suit, a high-ranking beater named Davis, interjected carefully. Does Ridgecroft know what she is? If he thinks she's just a human whistleblower, he might hand her over to human authorities to expose the land fraud. If she ends up in FBI custody, we can easily eliminate her there. Declan isn't stupid, Silas sneered. If he got close enough to grab her, he smelled it. He knows her bloodline, and if he mates with her, the power of that bloodline will be bonded to him. We have spent billions setting up the distribution network for the lycanthrope enhancement serum. Buyers in Europe, the Russian packs, they are waiting for the final product. Without her blood to stabilize the formula, the serum causes fatal rejection in 60% of test subjects. We need her. Silas turned to a large monitor on the wall, bringing up a live satellite view of the Ridgecroft estate on Mercer Island. It was a fortress. He declared war, Silas murmured, a twisted smile slowly stretching across his face. He told you he would burn my kingdom. Fine, let's see how much he cares about his new pet. He turned to Davis. Send him a message. Make it personal. Back at the Ridgecroft estate, the tension was equally palpable, though wrapped in the quiet hum of immense wealth. Clara had spent the last 2 days recovering in the penthouse suite, practically placed under a house arrest, albeit the most luxurious house arrest imaginable. Declan was rarely far. Even when he had to take conference calls to manage his legitimate corporate empire, he took them in the sitting area of her room, his eyes constantly darting to her to ensure she was still breathing, still there. The mate bond, Clara learned from Dr. Harrison, was making Declan intensely protective. For Clara, the adjustment was terrifying. She was a logical person, a woman of history and facts. Accepting that the man making her heart race was capable of turning into a giant wolf was a lot to process. Yet, the biological pull between them was undeniable. Whenever Declan was near, her anxiety melted away, replaced by a warm, intoxicating flush. Her body recognized him as safety, even if her mind was still screaming that he was dangerous. On the third evening, Liam stepped into the penthouse suite. Liam was Declan's beta, a towering, blonde-haired man with an easy smile that didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. Today, however, there was no smile. He carried a medium-sized FedEx box. Declan, who had been reading a report on the velvet sofa, immediately tensed. His nostrils flared, picking up the scent before Liam even spoke. "This bypassed the main mailroom," Liam said, his voice grim. "It was left directly at the south security gate by a courier. No tracking number." Clara sat up in bed, clutching the duvet to her chest. Declan stood up, his jaw clenched. "Open it." Liam set the box on a glass coffee table and sliced the tape with a pocket knife. He opened the flaps and pulled back a layer of tissue paper. Inside was a heavy silver hunting dagger, completely coated in dried dark blood. Wrapped around the hilt of the dagger was a piece of fabric, a torn sleeve from the denim jacket Clara had been wearing the night she was abducted by Montgomery's men. Pinned to the fabric was a heavy cardstock note. Liam picked it up and read it aloud, his voice devoid of emotion. "You cannot protect her forever, your majesty. Hide her behind your gates, and I will tear apart everyone else in your pack until you open them. See you at the full moon. S.M." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sharp intake of Clara's breath. A low, terrifying rumble started deep in Declan's chest. The air in the penthouse seemed to visibly vibrate. The glass of the coffee table cracked right down the middle with a sharp pop. Declan turned his back to Clara, gripping the back of a leather armchair so hard his knuckles turned white. He was breathing heavily, his shoulders rising and falling as he fought a brutal internal battle to keep his wolf from fully surfacing and destroying the room. Clara pushed the covers aside. She ignored the twinge of pain in her ribs and walked slowly across the cold hardwood floor. Liam stepped back, giving them space. Clara stopped behind Declan. She could feel the heat rolling off him in waves. Hesitantly, she reached out and placed her small, pale hand over his massive, white-knuckled fist. The moment her skin touched his, the growling stopped. The violent trembling in his arms ceased. Declan let go of the chair, turning around to face her. His eyes were fully amber, his pupils blown wide. "I won't let him hurt your people," Clara whispered, looking up into his glowing eyes. "If me being here puts your pack at risk—" "Stop!" Declan commanded, his voice raw and ragged. He brought his hands up, gently cupping her face. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, his touch unbelievably soft for a man who had just cracked reinforced glass with his aura alone. "You are not a liability, Clara. You are my mate. My pack is sworn to protect the king, and, by extension, they are sworn to protect their queen." He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. "Silas wants a war. He wants to drag the supernatural world out of the shadows and turn us into monsters for profit. I was content to let him rot in his own filth in Tacoma." Declan pulled back, his eyes shifting from amber back to a deep, stormy brown. The human CEO was back, but the ruthless alpha remained. He looked over Clara's shoulder at his beta. "Liam," Declan said, his voice deadly calm. "Call the vanguard. Liquidate our assets tied to Montgomery's supply chains. I want his ships seized at the port of Seattle by midnight, and I want every politician on his payroll exposed." "And Silas?" Liam asked. "Silas sent a dagger," Declan replied, his gaze returning to Clara, his eyes dark with a violent promise. "We're going to send him a graveyard." By dawn, the financial district of Seattle was bleeding, though the human populace was entirely unaware of the slaughter. Inside the glass-walled command center of Ridgecroft Capital, located on the 42nd floor of the Columbia Center, Declan Ridgecroft was executing a bloodless massacre. He stood before a bank of glowing Bloomberg terminals, his amber eyes tracking the plummeting stock prices of Silas Montgomery's dummy corporations. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp, cloudless Pacific Northwest morning, but the atmosphere inside the boardroom was as cold and unforgiving as a Siberian winter. Liam stood at the head of the conference table, a Bluetooth earpiece blinking blue against his ear. He muted his line and looked up at his alpha. "Customs and Border Protection just raided Pier 46, Liam reported, a grim satisfaction in his voice. Our contacts at the port of Seattle seized 6 shipping containers flagged under Montgomery Logistics. They found the synthetic wolfsbane derivatives and the medical equipment Silas was using to refine the serum. The FDA and DEA are seizing the assets as we speak. Montgomery Holdings is hemorrhaging capital. Declan didn't smile. He took a sip of black coffee, his gaze never leaving the monitors. What about the offshore accounts in the Caymans? Frozen, Liam confirmed. We triggered a cascade of margin calls on his over-leveraged real estate portfolios in Bellevue and Kirkland. Silas is losing millions by the hour. But Declan, cornering a rabid animal only makes it bite harder. Let him bite, Declan growled, his voice dropping an octave. I will break his teeth. Back at the Mercer Island estate, Clara was experiencing an entirely different kind of storm. The excruciating pain in her ribs had vanished. When she stepped out of the rainfall shower that morning and looked in the fogged mirror, she had to wipe the glass twice to ensure her mind wasn't playing tricks on her. The deep purple bruising across her torso had faded to a faint, sickly yellow, and the jagged lacerations were already scarring over. Human bodies did not heal this fast. Dr. Harrison arrived shortly before noon, carrying a leather medical bag and a tablet. He checked her vitals, his brow furrowing as he read the data. Your cellular regeneration is operating at 300% above the baseline human average, Clara. Harrison murmured, adjusting his glasses. The mate bond is acting as a catalyst. Declan's proximity, his scent, his aura, it is forcing your dormant lichen genetics to awaken. Clara sat on the edge of the plush bed, pulling a thick cashmere sweater over her shoulders. She felt restless. A strange, thrumming energy vibrated beneath her skin, making the quiet luxury of the penthouse feel like a cage. Her senses were sharpening terrifyingly. She could hear the rhythmic pacing of the perimeter guards on the gravel driveway 3 stories down. She could smell the sharp, metallic tang of the firearms they carried. "Am I going to turn into a wolf?" Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly. She was a woman of logic, a historian who dealt in documented facts. This biological metamorphosis was terrifying. "Not immediately," Harrison replied gently. "You are an ancestral carrier. Your bloodline predates the modern packs. The transition will be psychological and sensory first. Heightened aggression, territorial instincts, and an intense biological imperative to remain close to your alpha." As if summoned by the very mention of his title, the heavy mahogany doors swung open. Declan strode into the room, the scent of petrichor, cedar, and raw power flooding Clara's newly awakened senses. Her heart skipped a beat, and that restless energy beneath her skin instantly smoothed into a warm, heavy hum of contentment. The biological reaction was undeniable, and it terrified her how much comfort she found in the presence of a predator. Declan dismissed Harrison with a sharp nod. The doctor quickly exited, leaving them alone. Declan crossed the room, loosening his silk tie. The ruthless corporate raider from the Columbia Center melted away the closer he got to her. He sat beside her on the bed, reaching out to gently trace the fading bruise on her collarbone. "You're healing," he noted, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "Too fast," Clara whispered, leaning into his touch despite her reservations. "Declan, I can hear the guards outside. I can smell the pine needles on their boots. It's too much." Declan's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. The heat of his body was an anchor in the sensory overload. Breathe through it. Focus on my heartbeat. You are safe. The vanguard has secured the perimeter, and I have dismantled half of Silas's empire this morning. Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful thud of his heart. If you destroy his finances, won't he just come for me directly? He will try, Declan said, his eyes darkening, and that is exactly what I want him to do. Tomorrow night is the Pacific Northwest Heritage Gala at the Seattle Art Museum. Senator Robert Mitchell will be there. Mitchell is the politician covering up Silas's land seizures in Olympia. We are going to the gala, and I am going to publicly sever Montgomery's political protection. Clara pulled back, looking up at him in shock. You're taking me into public, to a gala. I am not leaving you behind, Declan stated, the alpha command slipping into his tone. Where I go, you go. Silas sent a message that he would attack the pack to get to you. I will show him that the Alpha King does not hide his mate. You will stand by my side, and we will draw the rats out of the shadows. It's a trap, Clara realized, her newfound instincts catching the predatory gleam in Declan's eyes. Yes, Declan agreed softly, kissing her forehead. And they will walk right into it. The Seattle Art Museum was transformed into a glittering display of elite wealth and quiet power. The cavernous main hall, dominated by massive, suspended contemporary sculptures, hummed with the low chatter of billionaires, politicians, and socialites. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided through the crowd with trays of Dom Perignon, while a string quartet played Vivaldi in the corner. But beneath the veneer of high society, a silent, deadly game of chess was unfolding. Clara stood near the grand staircase, a vision in a floor-length, backless emerald silk gown that clung to her curves and hid the remaining bandages strapped to her ribs. Declan stood beside her, looking like a dark god in a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo. His hand rested firmly on the small of her back, a physical brand of his protection and acclaim. Around them, moving seamlessly through the crowd, were a dozen members of the vanguard. Declan's elite Lycan guard, dressed flawlessly and communicating via sub-vocal microphones. Clara took a sip of her sparkling water, her heightened senses working in overdrive. She could smell the expensive perfumes, the underlying sweat of nervous politicians, and the distinct coppery scent of anxiety. "He's here," Declan murmured, his lips barely moving as he leaned in, pressing a kiss to her temple that looked entirely affectionate to the human observers. "Senator Mitchell. 2:00, by the Native American exhibit." Clara discreetly shifted her gaze. Senator Robert Mitchell, a silver-haired titan of Washington state politics, was dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief, looking incredibly pale. "Liam is locking down the exits," Declan said. "Stay with Wyatt. I need to have a very brief, very final conversation with the senator." Clara nodded, her throat tight. Wyatt, the heavily scarred head of the Vanguard's tactical unit, stepped up behind her. He was a massive man, second only to Declan in sheer bulk, radiating a stoic, disciplined energy. "I won't let you out of my sight, Miss Hayes," Wyatt said gruffly. Declan gave Clara a lingering look, his golden eyes flashing with a promise to return swiftly, before he slipped into the crowd, stalking toward the senator like a wolf cutting a sheep from the herd. For 10 minutes, Clara watched the elite mingle, but the restless hum beneath her skin was back, sharper this time. It wasn't anxiety, it was an alarm. Her lichen instincts were screaming at her. She turned to Wyatt. "Do you smell that?" she asked, her voice strained. Wyatt frowned. "Smell what?" "Ozone and burning sage. Something bitter." Wyatt's posture stiffened. "Silver nitrate," he whispered. Before Clara could react, a heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder. She spun around to face Davis, Silas Montgomery's meticulously groomed beta. He was smiling, but his eyes were dead, soulless pits. "Ms. Hayes," Davis purred, "Silas sends his regards." Clara backed away, bumping into Wyatt. "Wyatt, take him down," she ordered, her voice laced with a sudden, unnatural authority that surprised even her. But Wyatt didn't move toward Davis. Instead, Clara felt the cold, unforgiving steel of a gun barrel press directly against her spine. "I'm sorry, Luna," Wyatt muttered, his voice thick with shame. "Silas has my daughter. He took her from the pack house this morning." Clara's blood ran cold. The mole. Liam had warned Declan that Silas had eyes inside the pack, but they never suspected the head of the vanguard. "Walk," Davis instructed smoothly, offering Clara his arm as if escorting her to a dance. Through the service doors to the VIP lounge. "Make a scene, and Wyatt puts a silver hollow point through your spine. It will paralyze you permanently." Trapped, Clara let Davis guide her through the crowded hall, Wyatt a half step behind them, keeping the weapon concealed beneath his suit jacket. They slipped through a set of heavy mahogany doors marked private staff only, entering a dimly lit, soundproofed VIP lounge overlooking the museum's rear loading dock. "Secure the door, Wyatt," Davis ordered, pulling a pair of heavy, silver-lined zip ties from his pocket. Clara's mind raced. Declan was on the other side of the museum. The soundproofing would block her screams. She was entirely on her own. As Davis reached for her wrists, the dormant beast inside Clara clawed its way to the surface. It wasn't a physical shift, but a violent psychological detonation. The fear evaporated, replaced by a blinding, feral rage. She didn't pull away. Instead, Clara lunged forward, grabbing Davis's wrist with a strength that snapped the bone with a sickening crack. Davis shrieked, dropping the zip ties. Wyatt raised the gun. "Stop, Clara! I'll shoot!" Before Wyatt could pull the trigger, the reinforced steel service doors were ripped off their hinges with the force of an explosive charge. The heavy metal slab flew across the room, smashing into the mahogany bar. Declan stood in the doorway. He was no longer trying to blend in with the humans. His tuxedo jacket was torn, his dress shirt straining against the massive, unnatural expansion of his muscles. His fangs were fully descended, and his eyes burned like twin suns in the dim light. The sheer, suffocating pressure of his alpha aura slammed into the room, dropping Davis to his knees in instant, involuntary submission. "Wyatt!" Declan snarled, a sound from the deepest pits of hell. Wyatt's hand shook violently, but the desperation of a father overrode his pack loyalty. He pointed the gun at Declan and fired. The deafening crack of the gunshot echoed in the lounge. Declan didn't dodge. The silver bullet caught him high in the left shoulder, a burst of dark blood staining his white shirt. Silver was poison to lichens, a searing agony that burned through their nervous system. Declan barely flinched. In a blur of motion, Declan crossed the room. He didn't use his claws. He simply backhanded Wyatt with enough kinetic force to send the 300-pound tactical leader flying through the plate glass window, shattering it completely. Wyatt landed on the loading dock below, groaning in pain, neutralized but alive. Declan turned his attention to Davis, who was crawling backward, clutching his shattered wrist. "Wait!" Davis begged, coughing as the Alpha's aura crushed his lungs. "Silas has his daughter. He forced us." Declan reached down, grabbing Davis by the lapels and lifting him off the floor. "And Silas will die for it," Declan promised. "But you touched my mate." Before Declan could deliver the killing blow, the museum's PA system crackled to life in the VIP lounge, overriding the Vivaldi playing in Chowchital, the main hall. "A beautiful display of violence, Your Majesty," Silas Montgomery's smooth, arrogant voice echoed from the speakers. "But you are predictable. You brought the girl right into the open. Look down at the loading dock, Declan." Declan dropped Davis and stepped toward the shattered window, Clara right beside him. Below, in the rain-slicked alley, 3 black armored vans were blocking the exits. Heavily armed mercenaries were pouring out, but they weren't aiming at the VIP lounge. They were aiming at the Vanguard members who were fighting their way through the service corridors. "You broke my bank accounts, Declan," Silas's voice mocked. "So I am breaking your pack. I have 50 men surrounding the museum, armed with silver nitrate gas and hollow points. Hand over the girl, and I will let your people live. You have 3 minutes. Declan looked at the blood dripping from his shoulder, the silver burning through his veins. He looked down at the army assembling below. Then he looked at Clara. Her emerald dress was torn, her breathing heavy, but she wasn't cowering. Her eyes, usually a soft, warm hazel, were currently flashing with a brilliant, luminescent gold. The alpha blood in her veins had fully awakened. "We are not surrendering," Clara said, her voice dropping into a guttural timbre that sent a thrill of raw power straight down Declan's spine. "Burn his kingdom." Declan smiled, revealing his fangs, blood dripping onto the collar of his shirt. "As you wish, my queen," Declan roared, and then he threw himself out of the shattered window, shifting in midair into a monstrous midnight black wolf as he descended upon the army below. The impact of Declan's landing shattered the concrete of the loading dock, sending a shockwave that knocked the front row of Silas Montgomery's mercenaries off their feet. He didn't rise as a man. He rose as a nightmare, a monstrous, midnight black lichen, standing over 7 feet tall on his hind legs, his fur bristling with lethal static, his jaws snapping with bone-crushing force. Gunfire erupted, the deafening roar of automatic weapons echoing off the brick walls of the downtown Seattle alleyway. Tracers lit up the rain-slicked night. Silver hollow points tore through the air, but Declan was a blur of shadow and fury. He tore through the tactical formation with horrifying speed. A mercenary in heavy Kevlar was swatted aside like a ragdoll, crashing into the side of a Montgomery logistics van, with enough force to dent the armored chassis. Up in the VIP lounge, Clara didn't freeze. The gold in her eyes burned brighter as the ancient, dormant instincts of her bloodline overrode her human panic. The world moved in slow motion. She could hear the distinct, individual heartbeats of the men dying below, the smell of cordite, and the agonizing hiss of silver nitrate gas deploying in the alley. She looked down at Davis, who was still clutching his pulverized wrist, whimpering on the floor. Wyatt lay groaning on the loading dock awning below, incapacitated. Clara dropped to her knees, grabbing Davis by his pristine silk tie and hauling him upward. The sheer physical strength she exerted shocked her, but she didn't question it. "Where is Wyatt's daughter?" she demanded, her voice carrying a terrifying, dual-toned resonance. "Tell me, or I will throw you out that window to join them." "Boeing Field," Davis spat, blood bubbling on his lips. "Hangar 4. Silas has a Gulfstream fueled and waiting. The girl is leveraged to ensure Wyatt pulled the trigger." Clara let him drop. She spotted Wyatt's discarded sub-vocal earpiece on the carpet. She snatched it up, jamming it into her ear. "Liam, can you hear me?" Static crackled, followed by the beta's tense voice over the gunfire in the main exhibition hall. "Luna, where is Declan?" "He's in the alley." "Liam, Silas has Wyatt's daughter at Boeing Field, Hangar 4. You need to send a Vanguard extraction team there right now. Don't wait for us." "Copy that, Luna. Strike team is mobilizing. Secure yourself." The line went dead. The heavy steel door that Declan had previously ripped off its hinges was suddenly kicked entirely out of the frame by a massive, tailored boot. Silas Montgomery stepped into the ruined VIP lounge. He hadn't fully shifted, but the monster was bleeding through his human facade. His fingernails had elongated into wicked, yellowed talons, and his eyes were a sickly, glowing crimson. The scent of him was overwhelming, a putrid mix of stale copper and dark magic, the result of consuming human blood to artificially inflate his alpha aura. "I must admit, Clara," Silas purred, his voice slick with malice, "I severely underestimated your transition. Your bloodline is waking up beautifully. You'll make an exquisite resource once I chain you to my laboratory in international waters." Clara backed away, her bare feet stepping over the shattered glass. "Your accounts are frozen, Silas. The DEA has your shipments at Pier 46. It's over." Silas laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Money is just paper, my dear. Power is blood. Once I have you, I can rebuild the cartel anywhere in the world. The Russian and European packs will pay billions for the stabilized serum." He lunged. Clara's heightened reflexes kicked in. She dropped to the floor, rolling under his massive, swiping claws. His talons embedded deeply into the mahogany bar, tearing the wood to splinters. Clara scrambled to her feet, her hand desperately searching the debris. Her fingers closed around the cold, heavy steel of Wyatt's discarded sidearm. She raised the weapon, her hands remarkably steady, and pulled the trigger. The gun bucked violently. The silver hollow point caught Silas in the thigh. He roared, a sound that shook the dust from the ceiling tiles. But the unnatural blood he had consumed had altered his physiology. The silver burned him, but it didn't drop him. He backhanded Clara with brutal, blinding speed. The blow sent her flying across the room, crashing into the plaster wall. The wind was knocked from her lungs, the newly healed skin on her ribs screaming in protest. The gun clattered away into the darkness. Silas stalked toward her, his jaw unhinging slightly, revealing rows of razor-sharp fangs. "A spirit attempt. But you are not a warrior, archivist." He reached down, grabbing her by the throat and lifting her off the ground. Clara clawed at his arm, her vision spotting with black. Suddenly, a deafening howl shattered the night outside. A massive, blood-soaked shadow vaulted through the shattered plate-glass window. Declan didn't land gracefully. He crashed into Silas with the kinetic force of a freight train. The two alphas smashed through the interior drywall, tumbling into the adjacent hallway in a tangle of fur, fangs, and visceral roars. Clara dropped to the floor, gasping for air. She forced herself up, stumbling to the hole in the wall. The fight in the corridor was a primal nightmare, a terrifying clash of apex predators that made the surrounding opulence of the Seattle Art Museum look absurd. Declan was fighting in his lichen form, his massive jaws snapping at Silas's throat. But Declan was slowing. The silver bullet lodged in his shoulder from Wyatt's gun was poisoning his nervous system, leaving dark, necrotic veins spiderwebbing across his chest. Silas, fueled by synthetic enhancements and desperate rage, drove a knee into Declan's wounded shoulder. Declan roared in agony, his grip faltering. Silas seized the opportunity, burying his claws deep into Declan's side and throwing the Alpha King through a set of heavy double doors into the Renaissance gallery. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She couldn't let Declan fight a poisoned battle. She scanned the ruined VIP lounge and saw it. The silver hunting dagger Silas had sent to the estate, the one Davis had brought to finish the job. It lay forgotten near Davis's unconscious body. Clara grabbed the hilt. The silver didn't burn her. She wasn't fully transitioned, but it hummed with a cold, lethal energy. She ran into the gallery. Silas was standing over Declan, who was struggling to rise, his blood pooling on the pristine marble floor beneath a priceless 16th century tapestry. Silas raised his claws, preparing to deliver the killing blow to the Alpha King's throat. "Silas!" Clara screamed. The rogue Alpha turned, a sneer on his bloody lips. But he didn't expect the archivist to strike. Clara threw herself forward with all the newfound speed of her ancient bloodline. She didn't slash. She drove the silver dagger with both hands, using her entire body weight, plunging the blade deep into the base of Silas's neck, severing the spinal column where the beast met the man. Silas's crimson eyes widened in absolute shock. A horrible wet gargle escaped his lips. He reached up, his trembling hands grasping blindly at the hilt, but the silver was already melting his nervous system. Declan surged upward, his massive jaws locking around Silas's throat. With one brutal, decisive twist, the Alpha King ended the war. Silas Montgomery collapsed to the marble floor, lifeless. The aftermath was a blur of flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement of downtown Seattle. The Seattle Police Department had cordoned off the block, but the human authorities were kept strictly on the perimeter. The Vanguard, acting under the guise of an elite private security firm contracted by Ridgecroft Capital, managed the scene, scrubbing the supernatural evidence with ruthless efficiency. Inside the museum, the adrenaline had finally left Clara's system, leaving her shivering and exhausted. Her emerald dress was ruined, soaked in rain, dust, and blood. She sat on the tailgate of an armored Vanguard medical transport parked in the loading dock. Dr. Harrison was carefully extracting the silver bullet from Declan's shoulder. The Alpha King had shifted back to his human form. He was shirtless, his torso a canvas of terrifying bruises and rapidly healing lacerations. He didn't flinch as the tweezers dug into his flesh. His amber eyes were locked entirely on Clara. "It's out," Dr. Harrison announced, dropping the deformed silver bullet into a steel surgical basin. "The cellular regeneration is already pushing out the remaining toxins. You'll be at full strength by moonrise, Alpha." Declan nodded dismissively, waving the doctor away. He slid off the medical table and walked over to Clara. He didn't care who was watching. He pulled her gently into his chest, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent to calm the lingering frenzy of his wolf. "You saved my life," Declan murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You killed a rogue Alpha, Clara." "I think I just permanently resigned from the Oak Haven Historical Trust," Clara replied, a weak, breathless laugh escaping her lips. She wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his warm, bare chest. "Is it really over?" Before Declan could answer, Liam jogged up to the transport, his suit immaculate despite the chaos. He held a secure tablet. "Alpha, Luna," Liam greeted, dipping his head respectfully to Clara. the first time he had formally used the title. The strike team at Boeing Field was successful. Wyatt's daughter, Chloe, was recovered unharmed. She is currently en route to the pack house under heavy guard. Clara let out a profound sigh of relief. And Wyatt? He will face the pack tribunal for treason, Declan said firmly, though his eyes softened slightly. But, considering the extortion and his cooperation in the aftermath, he will not face execution. Exile, perhaps. The vanguard will have a new commander. Liam nodded. Furthermore, the remaining Montgomery Holdings executives are cooperating with the SEC and the FBI. Without Silas to terrify them, they are rolling over to save themselves. The cartel is entirely dismantled. The land deeds in the Cascades will be legally transferred back to the pack trusts by Friday. Good, Declan said. Clean up the rest of this mess, Liam. We are going home. Declan draped his heavy, dry suit jacket over Clara's shivering shoulders. He scooped her up into his arms, ignoring her weak protests that she could walk. She was too exhausted to fight him, and truthfully, she didn't want to. She rested her head against his shoulder as he carried her to a waiting SUV. As they drove across the floating bridge back toward Mercer Island, the storm clouds broke, revealing a brilliant, silver full moon over the dark waters of Lake Washington. Clara looked out the window, her hand resting over Declan's. A few weeks ago, she was a quiet archivist, drowning in municipal records. A woman who believed the world was strictly defined by ink and paper. Now she could feel the pulse of the earth. She could hear the whispered songs of the pack running through the ancient forests of the peninsula. What happens now? Clara asked softly, looking at the man who had torn down a billionaire's empire just to keep her safe. Declan turned his hand over, intertwining his fingers with hers. The ruthless alpha was gone, leaving only the man who loved her with a terrifying, absolute devotion. Now, Declan said, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, we rebuild. And you take your place at my side, not as a captive, not as a secret, but as my equal. Clara looked into his amber eyes, the final remnants of her human fear burning away in the warmth of the mate bond. Okay, she whispered. The war for the Pacific Northwest ended not with a nuclear strike, but with the quiet transfer of corrupted deeds and the flash of silver in a museum corridor. Silas Montgomery's kingdom was entirely reduced to ash, his illegal syndicates swallowed by federal indictments and the ruthless corporate acquisitions of Ridgecroft Capital. Yet, amidst the shattered glass and fallen empires, a new dynasty took root. Clara Hayes, once a woman defined by the dusty histories of the past, stepped into the luminescent power of her ancient Lycan bloodline. She did not merely survive the storm, she became its guiding force. Standing beside Declan on the balcony of the Mercer Island estate, the Alpha King and his fully awakened Luna looked out over a unified territory. He had promised to burn the world to protect her, but together they would forge a pact stronger than iron and bound by an unbreakable, eternal devotion.